Pressure is mounting on Iran after an attack on the UK embassy in Tehran on Tuesday. Is the West just looking for an excuse to get tougher with Iran? And what impact could this renewed pressure have inside the country? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Seeker. Well, it's been called the worst crisis between Britain and Iran since full diplomatic relations were restored in 1999. Diplomats working at the Iranian embassy in London have been ordered to leave the country by Friday afternoon. British Foreign Secretary William Hague made the announcement after the UK embassy in Tehran was stormed on Tuesday. Hundreds of angry Iranians, whom Iran described as students, converged outside the embassy compound before climbing the walls, ransacking its offices and burning British flags. Hague said that all UK diplomatic staff in Tehran had been evacuated and that the Iranian embassy there closed. Tuesday's attack followed Britain's decision to impose further sanctions on Iran over its nuclear program. A report by the UN's nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, has said Iran has carried out tests that were, in its words, relevant to the development of a nuclear device. Iran has always maintained its nuclear program is solely for peaceful purposes. Well, at the last moment, Iran's foreign ministry expressed regret for what happened outside the British embassy, but Foreign Secretary William Hague accused the Iranian regime of being involved in the attack on the embassy in Tehran.
The idea that the Iranian authorities could not have protected our embassy, or that this assault could have taken place without some degree of regime consent, is fanciful.
Well, the Iranian Foreign Minister Ali Akbar Salehi then took aim at Britain's decision to cut off diplomatic ties. He said foreign ministries are responsible for strengthening and expanding ties with other countries. But unfortunately, some governments, such as that of Britain, are doing their job irrationally and illogically. If the UK revises its behaviour and intentions towards Iran, we will revise ours too. Well, on Thursday, European foreign ministers met in Brussels and came up with a new round of sanctions aiming to push Iran closer to full financial isolation. The new sanctions are targeting 143 entities and 37 individuals. They include individuals connected to Iran's nuclear activities, the Islamic Republic of Iran shipping line, and members of and entities controlled by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Now, the sanctions include a freeze on assets held in the European Union and a ban on travelling to EU countries. The United States has backed the measures, but China has called on countries to exercise restraint. Well, joining me now to talk more about this in Oxford are our three guests. In Oxford, we have Oliver Miles, a former UK ambassador. In Beirut, Rami Khouri joins us. He's director of the Issam Faris Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs at the American University of Beirut. And in Tehran, we have Iranian political analyst Ghanbar Naderi. Good to have you all with us, gentlemen. Oliver Miles, if I could start with you. How critical does this situation become now the more pressure is put on Iran economically and diplomatically?
Well, I think that to talk about putting pressure on Iran diplomatically in the light of this incident is putting the cart before the horse. What happened was that a crowd of Iranians stormed the two British embassy compounds in Tehran and not only pulled down the flag, which, if you like, is a political move, but also destroyed houses, destroyed furniture, destroyed the possessions of the diplomats and so on. It's not really possible to continue to have normal diplomatic relations in those circumstances.
So what does the future hold then further down the line? Is this perhaps just a diplomatic hiccup that can be corrected?
No, I think it's more serious than that. No, I think it's more serious than that, because I'm personally, as a former professional diplomat, I believe very strongly in the value of diplomatic dialogue, and I think that what we need with Iran is not something technical, not something whether the flag is in this position or in that position. What we need is to be talking to each other and understanding each other, and I think that a large part of the problem with Iran stems from the fact that the United States, our allies, have not been talking to Iran, and the Iranians have not been talking to them for a good many years. Let us not get into that position. But if people behave in the way that this Iranian crowd behaved, one has to react, I'm afraid.
Let's get the view from Tehran then. Ghanbar Naderi, William Hague, the British Foreign Secretary, as we heard there, has said that elements of the Iranian leadership may have had a hand in this. What's your reaction to that?
The attack, I want to make one thing very clear and straightforward. The attack on the British embassy and the British compound was ugly, unjustifiable, undiplomatic, and anti-Iran. And I can assure you, I live here, I work here, I talk to people here, I know many people, and this unacceptable attack had nothing to do with the Iranian government or the Iranian leadership or the police forces or even the parliament. This was the work of a small crowd that did not represent anyone in this country.
But, I mean, you say this, but, I mean, there have been other protests in Iran against the regime, and those protests have been brutally met with brute force. So the contention is that if they can stop protests like this, they could have easily been able to stop a protest outside an embassy, but the view is that they chose to look the other way here.
Well, that's a catch-22 here. You see, when the police forces use, brutal force to contain an angry crowd, they are being accused of being brutal, and and that violate the human rights of the demonstrators to free speech and freedom of expression. Now, in this situation, they were extremely cautious, and they want to make sure that they can use soft power to control the crowd and protect the embassy and the British compound. So they did the same thing. Now they are being accused of being, making some compromises. So, I mean, in either way, if the police had acted, the government here, the police forces, would have been accused of being compromising. And you put yourself in the shoes of the police forces here. They just don't know what to do, because, as I told you, this had nothing to do with the government or the parliament or the leadership. Just bunch of angry crowd who were angry at British policies and plans, and that they just took there and things got out of hand, and some of them jumped off the walls, and they went inside, they ransacked the place, and I think some of them were even thieves, because I saw them stealing the pictures of the Queen. I mean, if these people wanted to send a political message, this is not the right way. This is not a diplomatic way. Iran is a responsible member of the international community, and Iran will never orchestrate such an attack on any embassy, including the British embassy.
Rami Khouri in Beirut, what's your take on this? Is this something that may have been in any way planned, or was this perhaps an excuse for the UK and by extension other Western nations to get tougher on Iran?
Well, my view, sitting in Lebanon and looking at the British and the Iranians and the wider context in which they engage, is that this is just part of a strong ideological battle that is taking place that uses various signals to send messages to the other side. The Iranians, in this case, who knows if the government instigated this or just stood around and watched it happen when some hooligans did it. We don't know, and we'll find out. Presumably the Iranian government could have done something. It's a very powerful, decisive government that moves very quickly when there's people doing disruptive things on the street. So it probably could have stepped in, of course. But this isn't about neither diplomatic punctilio nor intentions of governments in this particular narrow case. This is a war that's being waged between Iran, that represents a much wider set of people in this region, and the Western world, broadly speaking, the European Union, the United States, with a very sharp focus on the nuclear issue, but even much wider than that. And this is a wider ideological war that is being waged within the region between some Arabs and some Iranians and their allies, and it's now being waged at a wider international level. So I think it's probably getting you nowhere to zero in on the fine points of diplomatic punctilio and whether the government could have done this or not. The battle, the ideological battle, is what we have to look at. And the British ambassador, the former ambassador, I think has made a very important point, which is you've got to get a serious Iranian-American, Iranian-European, Iranian-IAEA dialogue that is more than a dialogue, that is a serious negotiation to resolve these issues. Without that, we're going to continue to get sanctions from the West and threats, including attacks, and you're going to get moves like this coming out of Iran, whether by angry Iranians or by the government or by both.
All right, let's turn back to Oliver Miles then. I know you touched on this point earlier, but I just want to bring up something that Mark MallochBrown, the former UK diplomat, said in The Guardian earlier this week. He said, and I'm quoting here, "It will be no comfort for British diplomats that they will now not be granted front row seats in Tehran for what follows. And given the real dangers, that is all our loss." Does he have a point here that the UK is basically losing an important line of communication in its dealings with Iran?
Yes, I think it does. If I can just go back on my own personal experience, I was the British ambassador in Tripoli in Libya in 1984 when we broke off diplomatic relations after the Libyans murdered a police officer and a policewoman in London. We, I think, really had no alternative to breaking off diplomatic relations. Public opinion was really seriously inflamed in Britain, and I think the government had to do what it did. But the result was disastrous. The result was 15 years in which we had no means of dialogue with the Libyans, and our interests suffered, and so did theirs. And I'm afraid the same thing may happen if we end up with no dialogue with Iran. In Iran, the stakes are even higher because we're talking about a situation which could quite easily lead to war in the near future. It's very, very important that we should be talking to them.
Let's talk a little bit more about what the potential impact of sanctions might be, and I want to turn back to Tehran on this. Ghanbar Naderi, what sort of practical, on a ground level, what kind of impact do this round of sanctions, all of the sanctions that we've seen against Iran over the last few years, what practical impact have they had on ordinary Iranians where you are?
Okay, let's be realistic for a moment. Any kind of sanctions against any country would have some effects, and these sanctions have had some effects on Iran's economic performance up to this very point in time. But I mean, this is not the right way forward. The problem is that the Europeans are using an old mechanism to solve a new problem, to resolve a new problem, and it is not going to work. They are trying to put pressure on Iran to give up its right to its nuclear program, and it didn't work for the past 10 years, and it's not going to work now, because in this particular point, every person here, including me, are united. We want to have a peaceful nuclear program under the direct supervision of the IAEA, and we are working towards that. What is missing here, as your distinguished guest just said, is a communication channel, and of course, they didn't mention it, mutual trust. We need to trust each other, we need to talk to each other. If that doesn't happen, this sanctions regime games and all these diplomatic rows will continue, and who knows, maybe one day things might get out of hand, like what happened a couple of days ago, the attack on the British embassy, and we might make hasty decisions, just as the way the British government did, and it called the government called up all its ambassadors, summoned all its diplomatic staffs back to Britain, and who knows, maybe they won't come back. Of course, I have trust that in the past we kept this communication channel open and we resolved our disputes. For instance, when we had the crisis over the book Satanic Verses published by Salman Rushdie in England, which severed ties between Iran and England, we had the arrest, the capture of the British sailors, that then we sorted out somehow. So I have complete faith in this particular problem also, that the two countries will find a way out of the current crisis. But sanctions is not the way forward. Yes, it is going to hurt us, and it has always hurt the ordinary Iranian citizens and not the government or the Iranian program. But at the same time, I think it is not the right answer. The British government, the European Union, and the United States should stop coming up with terms and conditions for talks. They should put these conditions aside and say for a moment that we want to just talk, have a serious conversation with Iran over the outstanding issues, including the nuclear program. And they will see a huge and wonderful response from Iran, because the Iranian government, the leadership, even those behind the nuclear program, are more than ever happy and ready to talk and sort out their differences with the international community. Of course, we should also say that this has to be within the framework of the IAEA, and so far it hasn't been the case.
Rami Khouri, do sanctions run the risk of alienating Iran even further?
Yes, of course, and not only that, they run the risk of getting reprisal actions from the Iranians, and the embassy attack may be one of those reprisals. We don't know. Clearly, the Iranians are the masters of defiance in this region. If there were an Olympic medal for national defiance, the Iranians would get it, the gold medal. And they have sparked a series of other movements around the Arab world. Notably, you can look at people like Hamas and Hezbollah and some of the other Islamist groups around the region who have similarly stood up to what they consider to be unfair double standards and hypocritical, predatory, and neo-colonial policies by various Western or international bodies on the nuclear issue, on implementing UN resolutions, and on other things. So the Iranians are not just a normal little country here. The Iranians are leading the global defiance of some of the positions by Western countries, the UK, the US, and others. Not only that, the Iranians now feel, with this wave of Islamist groups winning elections democratically in the Arab countries, the Iranians feel, whether it's right or wrong, they feel that they are on a roll, that their side is winning, that their side is strong, and that they're going to get massive support all around the region. At the same time, their ally Syria is in some trouble. So they feel a lot of confidence, but also a lot of faith in the positions that they've taken before. And as Mr. Naderi said, I think they are willing to negotiate seriously, and this is really the missing element, a serious negotiation without threats and sanctions and ultimatums, but to sit down and implement the rights of the Iranians to peaceful nuclear energy under IAEA regulations. And this is the real critical breakthrough that needs to be achieved. And I think the Western world really has to make a more serious effort at this, and the Iranians, I think, will probably meet them halfway. But sanctions and threats will get responses, as we've seen, and a better approach has to be used.
Well, let's put some of that back to Oliver Miles then, that the feeling among Iranians that there are double standards at work here, and this will only make Iran dig in their heels even further. They've resisted the last rounds of sanctions, and they'll do the same this time around.
I have a great deal of sympathy with that point of view. I think I would agree with most of the things that Rami Khouri said, but strong, is this the action of a strong country to let 200 students, apparently unprompted by the government, go and devastate a foreign embassy? Is that the action of a strong government?
Rami Khouri, you want to respond to that?
I think it's a pretty bad action. I mean, I'm critical of it, but this is how countries behave with each other. You know, the British invaded Iraq and overthrew the Iranian government back in the 50s. So different countries use different tools. So I think if we want to get into looking at what countries are doing, I think the British and the Americans and the Iranians and the Israelis and a lot of other people around here have a lot of mud on their faces. So I think it's I think deplorable action by any standard, but it's not an isolated action. It didn't happen just out of the blue. So I think we really have to look at the actions of both sides and condemn both sides equally when they are unfair or predatory or violent. And this is, I think, this equity has been one of the missing elements in this equation.
Ghanbar Naderi, I want to pick up on something that you talked about earlier when you said that Iran is ready to work with the West on resolving the nuclear impasse and so on. But what kind of leadership in Iran is willing to do that? Is it the moderate leadership? Is it the hardliners? I mean, the question is, who is really in control there?
You see, we have a functioning government and a functioning parliament. And everything goes through the parliament and is dictated to the government to implement. In this particular case, when the parliament voted in favor of downgrading ties, the government had to do it and implement it, and they did it. If we didn't have a functioning government, we would have just asked a couple of mobs to go and take over the embassy and destroy everything. No, it's not the case. You cannot blame the inaction on part of the government for what happened to the British embassy. Those who claim that Iranian government is not doing enough don't know anything about this country. Now people have become extremely indifferent towards political incidents and events. That's why they didn't try to stop it. That's why the police forces were extremely cautious in dealing with the mobs who attacked the British embassy. I mean, these things do not necessarily mean that the government was behind it or the parliament or the leadership was behind it. So that's one point that I want to make clear. Then you talked about double standards before we talk about the nuclear issue. When the 9/11 attacks happened against the US on the US soil. Most of those terrorists were Saudi nationals, but the US government did not attack the Saudi Arabia and did not impose any sanctions on Saudi Arabia.
I take your point, but I don't want to spend the program talking about what happened in 9/11 because that's a whole other program. But I appreciate your answer here. But the question I'm more interested in is about the perception of internal conflicts within Iran, and that is part of the problem in the international community's dealings with the leadership in Tehran.
Well, it has nothing to do with the internal politics here. As I told you, everybody supports and backs Iran's nuclear program, and we want to continue to be part of the responsible IAEA, international community. But we want to make sure that our friendship, our membership with this important body gives some results back to us. We are a member and we expect the IAEA to give us some incentives like technical support, like guidance, stuff like that. But so far they have only issued resolutions against Iran and its nuclear program, coming up with allegations after allegations and trying to create this kind of mistrust against Iran, that Iran is secretly trying to build a nuclear bomb. So I mean, you put yourself in the shoes of the government, the people and the lawmakers. What would you do? You will become a defiant nation because you don't trust them. We allow them to come here. They go out and give out the names of the Iranian scientists, and suddenly we see some of the Iranian nuclear scientists being assassinated here. So what should we do? What is the right way for Iran to do? Iran says that I want to talk to you with fair terms and conditions and without any preconditions. But then you come up with preconditions. You said you stop your nuclear enrichment activities, then I will talk to you. I mean, what kind of invitation
I want to let
that?
Oliver Miles respond to some of that. Why doesn't the West trust Iran's intentions as far as its nuclear program?
I think that the underlying problem is that you have a hostility between Tehran and Washington, and we have sided with Washington, but we've remained in the negotiating game. I hope we will remain in the negotiating game, and I'm relieved to, as I said at the beginning of this program, that William Hague made it clear that we haven't actually broken off diplomatic relations with Iran, so there is still the possibility of dialogue. But you need more than dialogue. You need understanding. You need a broad relationship, and that's what we haven't got.
Rami Khouri, isn't there also an economic pitfall for the West here, in that this European embargo, for example, on a major oil producer like Iran, has the risk of raising oil prices at a time when Europe is teetering on the brink of recession, and as well with the mounting debt crisis that it has? So it works both ways, basically, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, there is that danger, but when it comes to dealing with issues like the Iranian issue, with its many ramifications, the nuclear issue, Iran's involvement in Iraq, Iran and the Iranian-Saudi tensions, Iranian-Israeli tensions, when it comes to such a complicated issue, I think the track record has been that major Western countries don't think rationally, they think emotionally, and there are consequences to that problem. So if they try to create more pressure on Iran, it may backfire on them. The price of oil may actually rise. Iran may do other things in the region that will hurt Western interests. So this is really a rather irrational process in which people are fighting an ideological war that has many different components and many different fronts. And I think it's really urgent to ratchet down the degree of animosity and irrationality that we see on both sides, but I would blame the Western countries a little bit more. I think the Iranians have made more offers, more serious offers for negotiations and accepted openings, like the Turkish-Brazilian one, for instance. But both sides really have to climb down, think with their heads a little bit more, and look for mechanisms that can address these issues. But the problems are not just technical issues, they're ideological issues. Iran is one of the leaders of a big movement all around the Middle East, and the last movement in the world that challenges American, British-led Western, let's say, policies, or whatever you want to call them. They challenge them directly, and they challenge the Israelis, and this is a much bigger issue than just an embassy or nuclear
That
issues.
is going to have to be the last word. We will, of course, be following all of the developments that come out of this, but for now, I want to thank all three of our guests for taking part. Oliver Miles, Rami Khouri and Ghanbar Naderi, many thanks for your time. And that's it for this edition of Inside Story. Before we go, a reminder that we welcome your views on this and any other topic online. Just send them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching. Latest news is up next. Bye for now.